Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining me. And what I just ask is if you're willing to just put a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me, so I know that my audio is coming through. There we go. All right. So, oh, look at that. A whole bunch of thumbs over my face here on the screen. That's great to see. Well, I'm so glad you're able to join today. I know we got over 500 people that registered for today. So I'm sure that over the next 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, we'll have many others that do join. I would just ask everybody to make sure that you keep your mic on mute so that we can get through the presentation. I will try to leave some time for questions, which I'll ask. I mean, feel free at any time to pop a question into the chat window, and I'll try to get to those after giving a little bit of a presentation. If we do have time, I can call on someone and we can have a little bit of a verbal back and forth. But if you can keep yourself on mute until then, it would help everybody to hear everything okay. Well, listen, I really appreciate that to have the chance to honestly share a few thoughts. I've been on the Leland platform for a short period of time. My name is Mike, by the way. Sorry if I didn't mention that. But I spent much of the last 20 years of my career in education at Stanford for on and off about 18 years, starting as a student. Back here where I had the chance to have Warren Buffett hand me his wallet, which, I probably should have retired that day. I've had a lot of fun since, but I don't know that I've ever had it better than that moment. But, I went back after working outside for a few years to work at Stanford, first as the director of something called the Center for Leadership Development and Research, where I focused a lot of my attention on the MBA core curriculum and the leadership development components of that. Things like the GSB Leadership Labs, Executive Challenge, the Arbuckle Leadership Fellows Program, started something called Low Keynotes, which is a, sort of public speaking initiative, ran the View from the Top, the GSB's CEO Speaker Series. So I was very involved in a lot of the educational side of the school, and then took over the Stanford MSx program, which was called the Sloan Masters program at the time, which is a mid-career, master's program, much like an MBA, but for people a little bit further along in their work experience. And in addition to running that program, also oversaw the admissions process for about 10 years. And it was an integrated process with the MBA program. So I worked alongside Stanford MBA Admissions, was very involved in policy issues, and we had a lot of joint applicants. And so, got to see the inside essentially of the admissions process at the GSB for a number of years. So I'll talk a little bit about my coaching, towards the end, but I do want to just share that as context as we sort of jump into this. So, what I thought we could do here is start with a little sort of thought experiment. I'm going to share a couple of imaginary profiles. These are not actual individuals, but essentially all these data points are representative. They come from actual cases that I had the opportunity to see over the time that I was at Stanford. I'll give you a moment to kind of read through it. I'm not going to sort of read off all the details, but what you have here are two different individuals, and I want you to just try to put yourself in the shoes of someone in an admissions office, for a business school like Stanford or Kellogg or Harvard or Chicago or something like that. And imagine that you're essentially tasked with figuring out which of these two individuals to admit. It's at some level not that simple. Maybe both of them are admitted, maybe neither, maybe one or the other. But at the end of the day, it does come down to a series of decisions like this, where you're essentially looking at two profiles that have a lot of different dimensions to them, a lot of different nuances, and you're essentially trying to rank order which one is more suitable to be admitted to the program. So just as a sort of a fun exercise, what I'd like you to do is just based on your reading, and maybe you've been running some spreadsheets over the last 30 seconds and calculated some way of grading these folks, or maybe sense. But in the chat window, just type A or type B based on which one you would, maybe lean towards admitting over the other if it came to that. I'm just sort of curious to see, what we see as far as, this group, if I were to task you with being the admissions office. So far I'm seeing, pretty even, which is, I see A for GSB, B for MSx. That's someone's got a sort of a nuance there. And so it looks like the initial evenly split. Now, one thing that I'll just say as an opinion, a perspective that I have, having been through sort of the admissions ringer for many years, is that at this stage, reading these applications, and you might say, look, Mike, I haven't seen their essays, I haven't seen their letters of recommendation, I don't know what their resume looks like, and that's all fair and good, but I will tell you, it doesn't necessarily get easier when you have that more information. At the end of the day, it's comparing apples to oranges. And, when I look at the A's and B's, I would say that at this stage, if you chose A or if you chose B, that says as much about you, honestly, as it says about the individuals, right? I mean, it's really hard to tell from just this data that I shared with you who's actually going to thrive at a sort of particular program, who's going to do well academically or do well coming out of the program or take the most from it. But that's what you're trying to gather essentially in the admissions process. So good job. I think, honestly, you probably did as well as I could have done, sort of choosing there. So as we step back a little bit and just set the context, and I'm going to sort of go into some tips that I hope will be useful. I hope you'll be able to take away a few things, both in terms of a little perspective, and then also, tactically, as you think about submitting an application, what sorts of things, can help you reach your goals. Is just to think, essentially, what is the task of an admissions office, right? We're sort of looking at a set of individuals through their applications, and we're trying to imagine, essentially, imagine this portal into the future. They go through a school, they sort of engage with the institution, they come out somewhere on the other end as a different person, an evolved person, a hopefully more capable leader, someone who has a strong sense of direction and purpose, and can lead effectively organizations that maybe they don't feel confident to lead today. And that's really what the admissions process is doing its best. It's making bets. It's making investments of scarce spots in prestige programs. That's really what it's about. So tip one is, and I, if you read the description of this event, I already sort of clued you in that tip one was going to be know your audience. So that really starts with the admissions office, and I think it's helpful to just keep in mind that the folks in admissions, they're human beings just like you, like me. They're trying to do their job effectively. They're often constrained by time, attention. Many programs these days have many more applications, qualified applications, honestly, than they're able to admit into their programs. They're going through a subjective process ultimately, like you saw in the sample that I shared. It's not like everything lines up evenly and you can give a quantitative ranking, across all these different dimensions of someone's experience in life. So what do? We try to put in processes and use tools to minimize the bias, to make sure that at least if we're going to do a subjective analysis, it's done in a way that's rigorous, that's consistent, that's as transparent as we can be. We're going to use software tools and various other processes to make sure that we're going about that in a as effective way as possible, and that we're going back and looking at past experience and trying to learn. And if we see areas that we've made mistakes or think that we can do better, we try to do some after action review and sort of figure out how to become more effective at this task. And, essentially we're evaluating, I think it's important to remember, we're evaluating the application, more than we're evaluating the applicant. I mean, there's a little bit of fuzziness to that, but, we can't judge everything about a person's life and who they are. Essentially we have to go based on the application that's submitted and whatever information we have about the individual that can be, verifiable. And so sometimes, if someone is not providing complete information, it's not a judgment on them if they're not admitted. It's more a judgment on the application that they submitted was not, not provide enough adequate evidence that they would be, a strong enough contributor in the program. It's also useful to keep in mind that the admissions office is working under constraints, right? They serve a set of stakeholders. And having been an admissions director at a place like Stanford, I can tell you that amongst the stakeholders, the first amongst equals are the faculty, right? First and foremost, they would be the first audience that would, in a sense, get to test out the new class that I would recruit each year. I would get pretty immediate feedback in the first quarter on, who was standing up to their, sort of their bar as far as who they thought was, good quality admit. And if there were a few that were struggling, I knew that, fairly quickly as well. And, the faculty are within any academic institution are very important. They're tenured, so they tend to have lifetime appointments. They tend to be there for the longest. And anybody that tells you that, business school academics don't really matter has never worked in admissions. Academics are absolutely the first coin of the realm in a graduate school at a top tier university, right? The school wants to make sure that people are successful academically first. Beyond that, in terms of their potential to have an impact beyond the classroom, that's all gravy, right? That's, we want to see that. Obviously, we want the strongest candidates across many different dimensions, but academics are crucial, and that's really driven by the faculty, within the institution. But at the end of the day, I think, essentially what admissions offices are really trying to think about is, if we admit you to the program, what is that portal going to look like? What are you going to look like in 2, 3, 5 years? How confident am I that you're going to be in a place where, you've been able to leverage the experience, the campus, the institution in an effective way, and take that into the real world to have some sort of an impact, to have some sort of a positive agency. That's what we're after. And so that feeds into, sort of the next tip, which is really that you have to own your narrative. You have to, take responsibility for really driving the message that you're trying to convey to the admissions office. Thinking about those two profiles that I shared with you, it's really hard to sort of discern between those two. Which of these two would I go to first if I wanted to admit them to the program? And whichever one of them is more effective at crafting a story, a narrative, an emotional connection, a sense from you that, hey, if this person comes to this campus, they're going to grab, with both hands onto every learning opportunity that they have. They're going to value, they're going to be grateful for the experience. They're going to take the learning that they can get from our faculty, from the other resources and centers, as well as their classmates, and they're going to use that to go out and really try to grow as individuals and to have a positive impact in the organizations where they serve down the road. And that's really something that, as much as anything comes through in the, the message that an applicant is able to, convey through the story that they tell in their application. And this is, and I'm not talking about just essays, although obviously an essay is kind of the clearest opportunity within an application where you can just narrate in your own voice, essentially, what it is that you hope to, message to the admissions team and, how you'd like to tell your own story. But, there's other aspects of the application, letters of recommendation, your resume, even what you decided to study that are going to be part of that narrative. And the challenge is to figure out, there's some aspects of your application that you can't change, right? You can't go back and change the classes you took or where you went to school or the grades that you got. That's going to be part of your application, whether you like it or not. Maybe if you took the GRE or GMAT or whichever test you took, and you got whatever score I can't go back and change that. Maybe you can try to take it again, but let's say you're at a place where you figure this is as good as it's going to be. You have to think about those are part of your narrative, right? And so what are the other aspects of the application that you can add to that really sort of provide a broader narrative, a fuller narrative that you want to convey to the admissions office? You want them to walk away sort of feeling a sense of both, some emotional connection, some enthusiasm for your application, also a sense of what they're going to lose if they don't include you in the class, right? And this is really about thinking about your personal experience, your professional experience, what you've studied, what you've learned over the course of your life so far, and identifying things that you think could be sort of unique contributions in, business school class. Over the course of 1 year or 2 years, in a typical MBA program, just about every issue you can imagine is going to come up, whether it's a case study in the classroom about some kind of a strategy or an industry that might be at issue, or if it's like very personal issues in terms of, what does it take to be a leader in a demanding environment today where, workforces are distributed over the entire world, where there's a lot of diversity, where people are trying to figure out work-life balance issues. Technology is always a factor. There's so many different dimensions to what people are striving to learn and how they're trying to grow over the course of their year or two. And surely there's a number of things that you can bring that are fairly unique perspectives. Maybe it's experiences you've had in a specific country or in a particular industry. Maybe it's a family situation that you grew up in on a farm somewhere, or in a politically violent environment. I don't know, something that gives you a unique voice, and you want to make sure that as many aspects of your candidacy that are fairly unique and would be additive to an otherwise diverse class is really valuable to add in the context of your application. And the last thing I would say, and this is sort of slightly worded more in a negative, is you don't want to convey in your application that you need to go to this school for something that's a relatively common career outcome. I want to go work for top tier consulting firm, or I want to go work in a private equity fund or something like that, and I need to go to Stanford, or I need to go to Harvard, or whatever school it is that you're applying to. It's perfectly okay to want that, but I would sometimes tell our team, as we were starting out each year, the admissions process, say, one way to look at the applications is to sort them into two piles. In one pile, we're going to put all the people who say, essentially in their application that, I haven't been able to reach all of my goals. And so, what I've decided I really need to come to Stanford so that I can, hit this goal that I've been wanting to hit for some period of time. That's generally not the people that we wanted to admit to the program. And in the other bucket we'd have, or the other pile we'd have, the people who essentially were conveying to us, I've reached all the goals that I set out to achieve by this, sort of stage of my life, or even, sooner than I thought. And now I'm having to sort of rethink my goals and think bigger and think broader. Those are the people that we really want to bring. Those are the people that, are going to be stretched by being put in a community of sort of exceptional individuals, and have, sort of their worlds expanded and their values challenged, and hopefully come out of it with an even, sort of broader ambition than they came into it. So own your narrative. I mean, that's really, something that it's your responsibility to convey that in the application. Second, or tip 3 here, but second thing really sort of looking at the application itself is acknowledge your gaps. Obviously, in those two examples I showed, A and B, the profiles, I mean, there wasn't really anything in there that I would say was a gap. There was nothing that was like a big, red flag. One, had maybe a slightly stronger academics than the other. But maybe you've got a lower GPA. Maybe your test score isn't as high as you'd like. Maybe, you spent a year in a work environment that you didn't feel like you were able to really push yourself or sort of get the accomplishment that you hoped you would get, or something else in your application. Maybe you're suspended from school. Maybe you had a run-in with the law. I don't know, something that is there in your application that is going to sort of come up. You want to be honest about that. You want to demonstrate that you are taking accountability for it. You never want to brush that under the rug or hope that, hey, the other stuff will just balance this out. You want to address it really clearly and demonstrate essentially that you understand, that you take accountability, you take it very seriously. Hopefully you have some sort of an explanation or some sort of way to describe it. More holistically, though, I would say everybody has, gaps. They have weaknesses. They have challenges. And identifying some of the things where maybe, it's not your key strength, maybe, quantitative skills, or, maybe you're a little conflict averse at work, or maybe you don't feel like you're outgoing enough. Whatever it is, there's aspects of all of our personalities that, especially in certain environments or put under stress, can be challenges that we have to manage. Carl Jung talked about the shadow as being, an aspect of everybody's personality, right? It's sometimes it's the flip side of our strengths. The very things that make us, exceptional in some circumstances, pushed too hard can actually be, a double-edged sword and cause us problems in other areas. And I remember I heard a really great therapist who works with a lot of, performance athletes and sort of creative folks in Hollywood and places like that. Talks about, to really get the best performance, you have to sort of grab on your shadow. You have to pull your shadow in and make it a part of yourself. Make sure that it's really the full you that you're expressing. And I find that the most impressive applications that I would review each year, there was a real element of someone who was able to identify what some of their weak spots were, or what areas they were maybe not, up to snuff in. And they didn't just acknowledge that, they, embraced it, but embraced it in a way that also showed that there was a, recognition of where it could steer them wrong, or lead them down a bad path, or hold them back. Recognizing it as part of who they were, and committing essentially to figure out ways to be creative to either overcome that or to accommodate it through, other strengths or other developmental areas that someone could work on. And so it really kind of shows them essentially as, someone who has that growth mindset that, I can tell you every business school is looking for people with that, that sense of growth mindset, not just someone who's smart, but someone who, has a passion for learning, has, sort of intrinsic curiosity, an openness to feedback. At Stanford, we had this saying that, people would kind of have to say almost religiously through their first year of the MBA program, feedback is a gift. Right. And it was a way of just, essentially cushioning whatever you were about to hear that wasn't going to make you happy. Right. It was, you get a lot of commentary about things that you could be doing better. Here's a suggestion. And we would also refer to that as AFOG, AFOG, another effing opportunity for growth. And it was a way of just, kind of, using humor, or using a way to sort of soften the fact that, we're all under development, and people that can show, and especially if you have examples, and this can come up often in letters of recommendation, as well as other parts of your application, where you can show that, I've been able to take constructive feedback. I, take it without, without judgment or without too much defensiveness. And I really am, I have the maturity, the emotional maturity to, take that and try to grow from it. will, add one thing that I read some years ago. George Soros wrote in a book about how, as an early investor, he recognized that one of his key advantages was that when he made a mistake, and when he recognized that he made a mistake, he actually felt good. And, this is very unusual for human nature. Usually when we make a mistake, we recognize we make a mistake. I mean, the initial feeling, even if we're mature enough to step back and sort of not be defensive about it, is we feel bad, right? I mean, it's just a natural emotional reaction. And he noted that the fact that he felt good because he recognized that it was an opportunity to change something and, essentially bring his investment thesis, into alignment with, something that was the truth, something more accurate. And he said that he felt like that really gave him a little bit of an advantage relative to others. He was managing hedge funds, right? He was someone who was in this daily game of constantly trying to outthink the market. And years later, when I was working at Stanford on leadership curriculum and a lot of focus on emotional intelligence, this really came back to me as true emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence is, there's whole books that have been written about it, lots of descriptions, but I find the idea that it's thinking intelligently about your emotions and using your emotions to think intelligently is, one way of thinking of emotional intelligence. And that's one of the things that, schools are looking for. Fourth tip is to demonstrate, prove essentially, but, be able to demonstrate and give examples of how you have shown an ability to take initiative responsibly, working within a system, essentially, business schools, today's day and age, at a top tier American business school, it's not a simple, basic curriculum, go to the lectures, take the test, score above, such score, and okay, you're going to graduate, you're an MBA, right? It's a very dynamic, interactive, multifaceted environment. You've got people that are studying to go into finance. You've got people that are studying to go to become entrepreneurs. You've got people that are studying to go into fields like public policy or nonprofit management, social impact. There's so many different directions that people are going, and the general management is such a multifaceted area that, the core curriculum is really just meant to kind of create a basic common language for everybody to use. And then beyond that, it's really a lot of individual direction that people have to choose to figure out how they're going to craft an education that's going to be most beneficial to them. And really, essentially the admissions office is trying to put together a community that's going to work effectively together. So, you're looking for a lot of people that are creators, that are, that are not going to sit back and expect anyone to hold their hand or, bring opportunities to them. And so in the admissions process, we would look for a lot of, signs, measures of, is this person going to come in with a sense of entitlement? Is this person going to come in and be a prima donna, right? I mean, that's just not what you want. And it's challenging because, at a school like Stanford or similar schools, people have been high achievers. They know if they've been admitted, they've gone through a very rigorous process. And in many respects, they're going to feel a sense of entitlement because they got through this very difficult process. Now they're paying a pretty significant tuition, and they're at a place that's got this really high reputation. So their standards are going to be very high. They're going to be very demanding. And to a point, that's good because they're going to hold the institution to a high standard. They're going to hold their classmates to a high standard. But what we always wanted to make sure is that they're always going to hold themselves to the highest standard, right? They're not going to sort of sit back and wait on their classmates to do something for them or for the school to do something for them. They're going to, understand that really first and foremost, they're their own advocate. They're going to take initiative, but they're going to do it in a way that's additive to the community, not going to do it, sort of a bull in a china shop. And, they have to be, team players and community builders. So we would be looking for indicators of this. Most of all, we'd be looking for potential warning signs And you want to make sure that in your application, there's no warning signs in there that are, indicating that you might be that prima donna, you might be that person with a sense of entitlement. Sometimes that means, you got to know who you're asking to be recommenders for you. Sometimes have a preliminary conversation, understand what it is that they're going to say as far as areas of constructive feedback where they may have given you some feedback. So just keep an eye out for that. The last thing I'll say here, and then I do want to sort of open it up to questions and hopefully have a little bit more sort of interactive discussion, is take your time. There were so many times every year when I would be reviewing applications and I would have, more than a handful where I would really struggle because, based on what was in the application, I would say, I think this might be a fantastic person, to have at Stanford, to have in the program. The sort of the, indicators I have are all very, very positive, but, there's something missing in the application, or there's many things missing in the application. Sometimes it felt like the application was a bit rushed, or, maybe they were lazy, which obviously is not a good indicator. And that's, sort of that was usually the thing that prevented us from admitting someone. But I also felt that often someone didn't, because they're busy, because they're, in demand for other things, they didn't fully understand the process. Maybe they missed something or didn't realize what they were, supposed to be doing in parts of the admissions process. And we just didn't have time or sort of the ability to go back and sort of hold people's hands and do follow up and such. And so, those were those cases where we were often denying the application, not necessarily the applicant, but the application, because of something that was, missing in that application process. And so, if you're going to go through the process of applying to business school, you want to make sure that you read the instructions thoroughly, that you really understand, you pay attention to all parts of the application. At Stanford, I found that one area of the application that was often underestimated was the work history section of the application, right? Because people would submit a resume and they say, oh, all my information's there. And it's presented in a way that they think is, kind of presents themselves in a good light. But we would look at the work history because that showed salary. It showed how many people you managed. It showed what was the size of the company. It showed, why did you leave each position to go to whatever it was that you did next. And those were important factors. And it gave us some benchmarks to look across, different applications, different applicants. And sometimes people would just kind of put in something short there because they felt it was duplicative with their resume, or they, didn't think that it was as crucial a component. But, when you're thinking about tracking someone in terms of their leadership potential, most admissions officers will tell you that the best indicator of future leadership is, past leadership. And so looking at that work history and understanding it fairly thoroughly is a very crucial element of an application. I would say as important as, someone's undergraduate transcript or graduate transcript if they've been to business school before. So pay close attention to that. Be thorough in all the different parts of the application. If you're unsure, I would err on the side of being as comprehensive or complete as possible. And sort of give it your full attention. I mean, that should go without saying, but, having been in the admissions office, I saw many examples where, that didn't happen. So stepping back, so I just sort of went over sort of 5 tips. I just want to sort of come back to this comparison of candidate A, candidate B, and just, think through essentially, as I indicated before, each of these candidates at first glance look very promising, right? But if you think about those 2 people are going to be applying and I'm only going to be able to admit one, what could either of them do based on what I've shared that would, help their candidacy, help their chances of being admitted? And there's a lot, right? I mean, there's a lot of details here, but in terms of crafting a narrative, you can imagine that there's a lot that candidate A could say or candidate B could say that could provide some some meaning, some narrative, a story, a thesis, an elevator pitch, however you want to sort of think about it, about why they are applying to your particular program, this particular school, what they're hoping to accomplish over the next 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Candidate A might, have a passion for, starting a health tech company that focuses on, women's, reproductive health, or, impacting, disease in developing economies, or I don't know what her passion might be, but, there's a lot that she could say around how her previous experience ties to the educational opportunity, ties to what she sees as her mission in the years ahead. Candidate B, I don't know, maybe he wants to get out of government and go into the private sector. Maybe he wants to launch some community initiatives. Maybe he wants to go into policy fields of that are going to reduce inequality, or provide more entrepreneurial opportunities to particular populations, whatever that might be. Again, that's going to help to develop his candidacy. Each of them obviously is going to have some aspects of their leadership or of their intellectual experience that might not be their strong suit. The one that can demonstrate how they've been able to identify that, how they think about that, how they have been on a learning journey for some period of time, is going to give themselves a leg up. And whichever of these two, I can imagine either one of them, being very, very strong contributors within a business school community, a club leader, or, bringing speakers to campus on topics of interest. The more that they can demonstrate how they've been able to leverage their network to get things done, or the way that they've been able to create sort of pathways or opportunities for people that follow them, the more that's going to strengthen their application as well. And obviously, depending on how they complete their application, how seriously they demonstrate that they take the process, is also going to convey a message to the folks that are reviewing it in terms of, how serious a student they're likely to be. So hopefully, just thinking about these tips, I'm humbled that as many people registered for today. I hope that whatever time you've given, I've used that time wisely initially. I do hope to answer a few questions, but just want to share a couple of final thoughts here. First, before I started doing admissions, I was working in, the MBA program and the actual working closely with students in the classroom. And I saw students, they come to a place like Stanford, they're surrounded by 800-900 other really incredible leaders, other students. There's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of, a feeling of being inside the bubble. And there's a lot of FOMO, a lot of fear of missing out. I remember one day getting someone posted on WhatsApp a little screenshot of their iPhone screen, and it was like 11:38 p.m. and it said, "You have 17 events tomorrow. The first one starts at 6:45 a.m." And he just shared that and said, "Typical day at Stanford," right? It was there's this constant sense of feeling like you're on a bit of a hamster wheel, because there's just so many opportunities that are sort of thrown at you every day in terms of speakers and classes and group meetings and intellectually stimulating things. I find that the people that handled that the best were the people that came in having done the most thought before they came to Stanford, really thinking about, who they were, what they wanted, what they wanted to get out of the program. They had that as an anchor, essentially, or, a rudder to kind of give them a sense of direction. It made it easier for them to say no to, 12 of those 17 things and go through and really focus on the 5 things that were, more likely to actually be meaningful and impactful for them as they, as they sort of went through their year or 2 years at Stanford. And so, it starts with the admissions process. Even if you're not admitted to a school, if you come away from this program with deeper insight about, who you are. Stanford asked this essay question, what matters most to you and why? And I would often tell people that were applying, I'd say, look, whether you get in or not, if you come away with a better sense of what matters most to you and why, that's worth something. And it was a nice thing for me to say, because a lot of people weren't going to be admitted and I didn't want them to feel so bad, but it's actually true, right? It is so important. And in some ways it's as important or more important than being admitted to a particular program. If you come into a program under false pretenses, I assure you it does have a negative impact on what you get out of that experience. And I saw that, sort of lived out in a lot of students' experience. Second thought is just, start engaging now with whatever school, whatever program that you want to work with. I mean, Leland is actually a great platform if you're interested in, any of the top 10, MBA programs, because there's people that have been through the programs, on Leland. And I know, maybe it doesn't feel great to pay someone for sort of advice or sort of some time. You can obviously go on LinkedIn and try to make connections, or maybe some people that are, in the program at a school that you want to go to. But if you can make connections with some folks that either are there or have been there recently, I mean, what's nice about Leland is if you are paying someone, $50 an hour or whatever, $100 an hour, I mean, you really get their, sort of dedicated focus on your situation. And that insider knowledge can help you start to align your narrative with, essentially what the school has to offer. And you should think of this as a process where you may get to a place where even today you might think, oh, I've always wanted to go to Stanford. I've always wanted to go to Harvard. I've always wanted to go to Chicago. You may find through the process that really there's not quite as good a match as you expected. And that's not, I hope you wouldn't consider that failure, because failure would be going to some place that actually is not a good match for you, and realizing it a year into it or 2 years into it, or even a year after you graduate, that really that wasn't the right fit. So you want to make sure that you are exploring your narrative, thinking about your narrative, trying to align it with the school, while also validating that the school is probably a good fit, or the program that you're looking at is a good fit for you. And then third, think about your education is starting today, or it's already started. You're sort of in a process. I think the admissions process can be a very educational process, especially for something like management and leadership, which if you're, studying to go into an MBA program, that's ultimately what you're striving for. Even if you're going to be a finance expert or investor, you're really, in the field of having an impact in the world through human-led organizations in one form or format or another. And that really has to start with, good self-knowledge as much as anything. So think of this admissions process as a discovery process, an educational process. And don't wait to get admitted to, start trying to learn from what the school has to offer. I was reflecting recently on how, Steve Jobs never attended Stanford as a student. But he used to come onto campus when he was after graduating, or after when he was starting up Apple, would sit in on lectures all the time. There's a ton of classes you can show up on campus any day of the week and sit in on computer programming, AI classes, and in the computer science department. And no one's going to know that you're not a matriculated student. I know I shouldn't probably be saying that, or Stanford wouldn't want me saying that. I'm no longer an employee, so I can get away with saying that. But the reality is there's a lot you can do. Obviously, geographically, you may not be, have that luxury of being able to, sort of drive on over to campus. But there's ways of engaging with schools through public offerings that they have, through online courses that they offer. The more you get to know, some of the faculty and the different offerings that a school has, the better you're going to be able to, adapt your message in an application. And as I said, you're sort of starting that educational process, today. And this is really where, why did I sort of join the Leland platform recently? I have to tell you, I did not initially, when I left Stanford, I thought, I'm going to take some time from doing admissions, from doing education. I missed the opportunity to have conversations with people that were in this space of focusing on their own development, their own passion, seeing going back to school as an opportunity to, lead themselves to something that's really impactful in terms of the impact that they wanted to have. And, I was getting approached by some people just asking for their advice. And I found myself getting really passionate about their journey. And, when I was a admissions director, right? I mean, I engaged with people all the time, and I would get, jazzed about some people, not so jazzed about others, but I would, have to maintain a certain reserve, right? Because until someone was admitted, I couldn't really, be an advocate for them beyond a certain point. And what I found is that now I can sort of sit on the other side of the table to some degree and really, champion the case of someone who I believe has the potential to be, sort of at whether it's Stanford or another school that they're applying for, and really help them think through essentially, not just the admissions, but really their broader journey. How are they going to get the most out of an educational experience? How are they going to make sure that where they go is the right fit for them, that when they get there, they're able to, take full advantage of the opportunity, that they're going to come out the other end as much as possible, sort of where they hope to be or where they expect to be. Because, I saw most people, very effective when they come to a place like Stanford Graduate School of Business. But, I also saw the cases where, there were challenges and missed expectations and there wasn't a good fit. And, I didn't like to see that when I was working at the school. And now, as I'm working with individual clients, I also, want to make sure that whatever experience I have, whatever wisdom or knowledge I have, can be helpful to them and making sure that they're moving in the right direction. So let me pause there. I did ask Amanda, who's I think on the call here, if she could at least try to keep a little bit of an eye on the chat window and identify any questions that came in. So as I wrap up, rather than kind of going and scrolling through the chat window here, maybe I can maybe you can pose one or two questions to me, Amanda, that I can try to answer with the time that we have left.
Yeah, so starting off, we have a question from Sebastian, and he asks, how can one reconcile messaging the application to be on the I want to explore pile without having clear, achievable goals? For example, HBS asks about impact you want to have through business. And we also had a similar question regarding the Why Stanford essay and kind of balancing those two aspects of exploring your interests, but also having those definite goals.
Yeah. So, a few things just to kind of keep in mind. One is, depending on how early you are in your career, that's, going to be easier or more challenging to navigate, right? I think, from having looked at applicants from the admissions office perspective, someone who's 25 years old, I don't expect them to kind of have their life figured out. And, they have opportunities to stumble and sort of make some bad choices, over the next few years, and be able to, fairly easily recover, assuming they've got some talent and, good common sense about them. And so, if you've been able to demonstrate a certain level of achievement in terms of the things that sort of a typical 25-year-old would have, that's applying to a high quality business school, right? Which is kind of a good academic record, some sort of thoughtful contributions that you've made in places that you've worked, then I think there's a lot more flexibility there. It's more on what you've achieved and where you are today and how you're thinking about, essentially that exploration, less about where do I see myself in 5 years, right? Because it's perfectly reasonable for someone at that stage to say, I don't have it all figured out, but here's how I'm thinking about exploring this. And here's some considerations that I've made. Someone who's a little bit further, someone who's got, 6, 7, 8 years of work experience, there's a lot less patience for that, quite frankly, because, at that point, to take 2 years out to go back to business school, you're going to be pushing 30, and, recruiters start to look at you a little bit differently. And it's harder. Like the switching costs become a lot more challenging. The sort of barriers to making pivots in your career become higher or more costly. And so I think, depending on where you are, if you're in the sort of like 0 to 4 years of work experience, there's a good amount of flexibility there. If you're sort of 5, 6, 7 years of work experience, I would be a little bit more cautious and try to, sort of at least be clear about, kind of here's my hypothesis. Like here's what I think I want to do next. And, here's my backup plan or something like that to, make sure that it doesn't look like you're too wishy-washy or don't have enough sort of direction or maturity at that stage of your, sort of career journey. I hope that's helpful.
We have another question from Robert, and he asks, do all of your tips equally apply to 2+2 or deferred candidates, or is there any additional advice you have?
That's a good question. I only periodically, I talked about 2+2 deferred candidates. I didn't actually review any 2+2 candidates when I was in the admissions at Stanford. And so it's not my sort of area of specialty or focus. I think that, again, that's an area where you're not going to have a real sense of direction as far as like longer term, but you should have a clear sense of direction of how you expect to spend the next 2 years, right? You're applying to school and you're planning to take sort of 2 years to go off. I mean, the school's not frankly interested in having you go spend 2 years on the beach, saying like, hey, I've got a seat at Stanford or Harvard or whatever other school. And so I can just, kind of blow off the next 2 years and it's nice. Right. So you do have to have sort of a clear plan of how you want to spend the next 2 years. Gaps, I would say, is the same. Understanding the audience, I would say, is the same. And take your time, I would say the same. So yeah, apart from the sort of notion of the narrative, I think the narrative obviously is going to be specific to someone who's at that stage and in that particular scenario. But I would say that the tips do generally apply, very similarly to someone who's applying as a college senior.
Okay. Another question is from Nalia. Where do you recommend to acknowledge your gaps in your main essay?
So, every school is a little different, right? Obviously, not every school, but Stanford has its essays. A lot of schools have a personal statement. I would say that, in there, Stanford has 2 essays, so I'll just speak to that, right? It's sort of what matters most to you and why. That's a lot about, kind of your personal introspection. And so, is it necessary to talk about your gaps there? No, it's not necessary. It doesn't necessarily answer the question. Although I will say, most people don't really answer that question. The question that they really answer is, what do I think the admissions office wants to hear, right? That's what they're trying to sort of craft an essay for. And so, it's a personal statement. And I think that, you probably want to sort of think about how it works in, however you're sort of thinking about answering that sort of general question. The second question is, why Stanford? And it's more about, why do I want to go to business school? And I think that is a place where it's very suitable and makes a lot of sense to talk about what it is that you're trying to develop about yourself, how you think about your strengths, how you think about, some areas where maybe you're not so strong or find it more challenging to be effective as a leader. And, how you think going to business school or going to this particular business school is going to help you with that. The other place to keep in mind, it's a little trickier, is the letters of recommendation. I'll tell you, when I applied to business school many years ago, I was in the Peace Corps at the time, and I was 25, 26 years old, and if you know anything about the Peace Corps, it can be a fairly sort of bureaucratic. It's a U.S. government run, sort of program. You're working in other countries. There were a lot of rules that I thought were silly. A lot of my colleagues thought were silly, and we weren't shy about saying so. So when I asked for a recommendation from the person who was, kind of my group manager, who was responsible for, quite frankly, took a lot of the, sort of criticism that I'd doled out about how I saw this group. That showed up in my letters of recommendation, right? And at first, we had a good relationship generally. I think he admired the work I'd done, and it was only at the last minute before I submitted the application that I asked him. I said, "Hey, can I see that letter of recommendation just so I have that as context?" He showed it to me, and there were some pretty direct, comments in there about, times that I'd been immature, times that I had been, too, assertive, too aggressive about, sort of my opinions or thoughts. And it was a little shocking, and I thought, deflating. He told me he'd actually worked in admissions at Berkeley, or had been on like a admissions review board at Berkeley. He said, "Look, I know it sounds bad, but it's these letters that don't have anything negative in them, or don't have anything that's kind of points out areas for development, often aren't taken as seriously." So I'm glad I did that, because it allowed me to talk about that in my own essay, and talk about, I think, with real, I don't want to say humility, but, I recognize like what he was saying was true. There was something there, and there was something that I needed to acknowledge and recognize in terms of, a certain impatience. It really was. In my case, it was, driven by, feeling like we were being held back from doing things that could be constructive or helpful. But, not necessarily expressing in a way that was as mature or effective as it should have been. Right. And so I was able to talk about that, and it was something that showed up in my letter of recommendation. And here I am talking about recognizing it myself. And I think it created a very, effective narrative about having some self-awareness and some self-acknowledgement of where I made some mistakes and could develop, and be better in the future. So, in that case, that wasn't something that I planned out, although I did ask to see the letter of recommendation. I would generally advise that if you can get your recommenders to share the letter before you submit your application, and that allows you to, when I say own your narrative, it means owning the full narrative of your application, not just what's in your essay, but how your essay and your transcript and your letters of recommendation and your test scores and all the different pieces fit together, and what that is going to, what story that's going to tell to someone who's reviewing your application. You have to take ownership for that. You can't say, well, I just did the essay and everything else kind of is something in the past, or something that someone else is going to submit. So and in my case, I didn't, I didn't sort of acknowledge that weakness before I saw that letter of recommendation. I'm really glad that he was willing to share that with me, and I'm glad he pointed it out. It turned out well for me. The more you can do to surface, and part of this may be going to some of the people that you've worked with, going to the people that you're going to ask to be your recommenders, and say, look, if there's one piece of feedback, if there's one thing that you think I could be doing better, or that's most important for me to work on, what would it be? So you may need to do a little bit of digging. You may need to do a little bit of data gathering to, identify what those things are, and then figure out where in the application that's going to best, fit in. It might be through letters of recommendation. It might be in your essay. It might be in that work history, right? If you think about the work history, different schools approach it slightly differently, but they'll have, something in there where you talk about your responsibilities, or a challenge that you faced, or your key accomplishment, or why you left that position. And sometimes, that may be the place where, something that you're sort of working on, or something you recognize as a challenge you're trying to address can show up, effectively. So there's not kind of like a secret formula that, you've got to put it, somewhere specific. So I hope that's helpful. I know I can't give you a sort of final definitive answer. I know we're a few minutes over, but maybe there's one more question. Amanda, do you see anything that sort of stands out as a good one to wrap up on?
I have one that's a combination of a lot of questions that were asked about this topic. So we had I would say 4 or 5 people at this point ask, in your opinion, GMAT or GRE for both the test and what admissions committees look for? And if you don't have a competitive score, how can you balance your application?
So I can't speak for other schools, but I would say that, Stanford, there was no difference between GMAT or GRE. I mean, essentially, the school is going to look at the relative elements of the scores and how you rank as far as, percentiles and such. So they don't have a preference between GMAT or GRE. In terms of someone who has a lower score, ways to accommodate. I mean, each school is looking at, I would say, like, generally almost all schools are looking at 3 things, right? There's the sort of the academic or intellectual component of your application or your candidacy. There's, sort of the management leadership aspect of it. How effective are you going to be from a career perspective? And then I would say diversity. There's, and I say that in a very sort of general, wide-ranging perspective. You want people who come from a wide range of different backgrounds and experiences, so that over the course of a couple years, you've got a very dynamic community that, can serve as a sounding board on just about any, sort of issue or topic that comes up for someone. And so, the GMAT or GRE is going to be first and foremost about that first piece. How is someone going to perform academically? Every school wants everyone they admit to perform successfully. We would sometimes say at Stanford that, we try to set the bar really high in the admissions process so that we can set the bar really low for our students. And what that means is we want to give people the freedom to explore. We don't want them to focus too much on their grades or their test scores. Once they're in the program, we want them to be able to take risks, take the classes that are going to be harder for them and not worry about their GPA. And so, you want everybody to come into the program to be ready to engage in that academic community, to be successful as students, as well as, alums afterwards. So if someone has a weak test score, it depends. There's not, it's not a sort of, not everybody's the same, right? If you've got a really strong performance in a rigorous academic program and a low test score, I mean, it's going to make the admissions committee wonder, what happened there. But they've got the fact that you performed well in a, challenging academic environment previously as, some verification that you're going to be able to handle the program. The work that you do, how intellectually demanding or challenging is that work is another factor that the admissions committee is going to look for. In terms of things that you can actually really influence in your application as a standalone piece, in your essay, in your letters of recommendation, in your work history, I would try to do everything I can to emphasize essentially, rigorous thinking, analytical thinking, effective communication, things that are going to speak to essentially your the chances that you'll be able to perform well in an academic environment. I mean, at some level, a bad test score is a bad test score. You can't just erase it or eliminate it without, retaking the test and doing better. But there are other aspects of the application that get at that, the same thing that the test score is there. I mean, the test score is just a data point. Every academic institution is going to look holistically at your application. And if there's enough indicators, that the test score was an anomaly and you're going to be able to perform just well in the sort of academic environment, you can overcome that. I find, the challenging thing is when you think about your narrative as a whole, the more time you're trying to account for the fact that I've got a low test score, or I did poorly in school before, the more time and attention and space in your application you're trying to overcome that gap or that, sort of limitation, the harder it is to build out the other part of your narrative, right? Around sort of what is your potential and what is the impact that you can have after going through this program in that school. And that's the burden that you have to carry essentially if you're going into a competitive admissions process with, some bad grades or, and look, I mean, I saw it all the time. People that were late bloomers that, maybe took it for granted their first couple of years of college and, it had it easy. They were always the smartest kid in high school or whatever. And, And it wasn't until maybe their junior or senior year, or even after they graduated, that they suddenly kind of had a rapid maturation and have really come a long way in the last couple of years. And those were the tricky ones, honestly, from an admissions process, because, that's a legitimate, real thing. And you'd want to, have room for some people and take that risk. But they had an additional burden in terms of demonstrating that in their applications, that it was worth taking that risk because of, sort of the potential that they have. So I recognize some of these questions are not satisfactory because, probably a lot of you are looking at those two profiles I shared, profile A, profile B, and you're saying, oh gosh, compared to me, like, both those people will be admitted. And, I don't have that sort of level of qualifications, or my test scores aren't that good, or, my accomplishments aren't quite there. I can tell you that either one of those people, those profiles, maybe they'd be admitted, maybe they wouldn't. A lot of people that have profiles that I could write out like that looked less impressive, would be admitted because of other things that are in their application. Yeah, I think, it's a process. And I do want to say, just the fact that you're going through that process, the fact that you're showing up to a session like today, trying to understand it better, shows a level of commitment to your own learning journey, to your own personal development that, sort of already puts you in the, sort of the top quartile, top 10% of the population at large. And honestly, like, getting into a school is probably less important than having that drive, having that, hunger for knowledge and development. And so you're on the right pathway. And, whether it's Stanford, whether it's another school, whether it's other learning and development opportunities that you pursue, I know that most of you that are here today are going to get a lot out of that and are going to, sort of come a long way over the next couple of years. I'll